Hi, my name is Michael Burris, and I'm the CEO of the South Carolina Policy Council. Thank you so much for tuning in to our 2026 candidate interview series. I would like to thank our donors and my staff for their contributions in making all of this possible. What you are going to see are candidates from both parties running for statewide office in the 2026 cycle share their platforms with you, our viewers. Our interviews will be based off of the South Carolina Policy Council's core values of limited government, free markets, and individual liberty. We appreciate you watching, and we hope you enjoy. Welcome, everyone, to our 2026 candidate interview series. I'm Michael Burris, the CEO of the South Carolina Policy Council, and I'm joined by our research director, Sam Aaron, and Lieutenant Governor Pamela Evette, a Republican candidate for governor. Lieutenant Governor, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, ma'am. We're going to go ahead and get into the questions, and the first question I have for you is, why are you running for governor?
Well, there's a couple of reasons why I'm running for governor. First, I love the legacy that the governor and I have started, and I think there's still a lot left to be accomplished, and really want to be part of that. Secondly, because I think we need more business people in government. It was exactly what prompted me to say yes to the governor when he asked me to run as his lieutenant governor. Because I said to him then, I said, Governor, why me? Why out of all the people in the state did you pick me? And he said, because I want a business person. I want somebody with a fresh set of eyes that can take a look at things and talk that business lingo that you talk with businesses and come back and figure out what we're doing good and what we need to fix so that businesses get more advantage of being here in South Carolina, and that we can attract more businesses to our state. Tell us what we're doing good. Tell us what we need to fix.
Thank you, ma'am. I'm going to turn it over to Sam to talk about taxes and spending.
Yeah, so this is the real meat and potatoes of what we do as an organization. We're always looking at the budget, and one trend that we've noticed is over the past 25 years, our state general fund has increased every year with the exception of one COVID-induced pause. What kind of steps would you take to kind of slow that growth of spending? Because we've outpaced population growth and inflation, so we're spending more than just what's to be expected.
Well, I think you saw some of that this year, right? The General Assembly coming in and like pretty much pushing out earmarks and making sure we didn't have any of those this session. I think that it all starts with reining in spending, figuring out what do we do well, what is the state's responsibility to take care of, right? I said, I think in the first debate I ever had was what do we do to look at where core spending is. You know, it's education, it's roads, it's HHS, and how do we get back to that core and figure out where we need to actually put money into to really fix core problems, and then cut down on all the rest. And I think really we could utilize a lot of technology and AI to be able to do that. You know, I chaired the Republican Lieutenant Governors Association last session. I'm an executive member now, and we talk a lot about what we're doing in our states. And when you look at using technology and AI to really go in and run efficiently, you know, states like Indiana have saved almost $900 million. And by going in and utilizing their systems, instead of hiring people, instead of putting more bodies there, which we know statistically that we're aging out, you know, our workforce is getting older, they're going to leave. South Carolina is growing. You're not going to be able to hire enough people to outpace the growth that we have. So now is the time to really look at taking some of that money and really digging into our systems. You know, there are agencies that have very old and antiquated systems. And because of that, it stops us from being able to bring technology that streamlines what every single South Carolinian needs when they go into any one of our departments.
Right. I think also the spending issue is broadly connected to our overall tax rate. We're one of the higher taxed states when it comes to income tax in the Southeast. So as a governor, how would you influence the way that we would pursue tax relief and finally get rid of that income tax? As we polled this issue in July, and we found that 73% of South Carolina voters supported eliminating or greatly reducing the income tax. And what's interesting is this isn't just a Republican issue. This is Republicans and Democrats who are both for this issue. So how would you support that?
Well, I'm completely supportive of that. I've been talking about since I announced I'm running for governor that I think we can and we will eliminate state income tax. And a lot of that comes in with what we just talked about. How do you start reining in spending? How do you start running government more efficient? And then but I think when you look at taxes, you have to look at a very comprehensive viewpoint of how we're going to change our tax structure, right? I think too many people talk about just one kind of tax. Like, oh, let's talk about state income tax. Well, then how does that affect other taxes that we do? How does it affect sales tax? What are we talking about when we talk about property taxes? So I think we have to do a comprehensive look at everything. I believe with the amount of surpluses that we have every year, we definitely can, and we can do it at a much more accelerated rate than we're doing now. And the governor and I, up to this point, have been very encouraging to continue to drop that rate at a much quicker pace.
Yes, I totally agree with you. And I've noticed that as the budget process ramps up every year, what we see is the initial governor's proposal, that's the smallest budget, and then it grows when it gets to the House, and then it grows when it gets to the Senate, and then it grows when it comes back to the House. And then we end up with a budget that's a lot larger than the initial governor's proposal. So how would you exercise the use of a line item veto to more closely align it so that way you can reduce that spending and, further accelerate that tax relief?
Well, I think a big part of what I'm very proud of that the governor has done is how we've worked with the General Assembly, right? Instead of fighting with the General Assembly, let's be honest. The governor's role constitutionally is not as strong as the General Assembly, and the General Assembly controls the purse strings. So it's how do you sit down with the General Assembly and come up with the initiatives that you both feel are important that will drive the state and the state's growth forward, and then work at that. I think we've done really well over the years by trying to work with the General Assembly. We are, when you look at a lot of what people are asking for, it does add to the budget. I mean, I know we're going to talk about it later, but infrastructure, roads, bridges, those things, take money to fix. And then we have to really be cognizant of the fact that if we don't focus on those issues, that's going to be really hard for businesses to continue to grow.
I agree. In part of us, doing this interview and figuring out what all of these subjects are going to be, we polled all of our supporters and got their recommendations. So this question comes from Alex in Greenville. South Carolina has a state law requiring all state agencies to follow zero-based budgeting principles annually when submitting their budget. As governor, would you immediately enforce this law? And just for context, in practice, what it looks like whenever you look at these agencies' submissions is they submit for, the increase in spending and then for new spending, but not for the previous stuff. So what it looks like happens a lot of the time is that these existing programs, you don't actually evaluate whether they're worth the money spent on it. So would you enforce this law?
Absolutely. So, I'm an accountant by trade. Most people forget that because they talk about my life as a CEO, CFO. But yes, I think you have to evaluate everything. Every business owner will tell you that no matter what department sits under your roof, you look at it every year to see what's working good. If it's not working good, let's get rid of it. If it is working good, how do we automate it even further so that it becomes even a more profitable sector? I think we should be doing that for every single one. As the governor, you have your cabinets, and you can start right there and say, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to hunker down. We're going to figure out what money has already been allocated. Has it been spent? If it hasn't been spent, why? If it's something that we don't need anymore, then we have to bring it back and let's figure out where we could use it more wisely elsewhere.
Thank you, Michael.
Man, we're going to switch gears into government efficiency and transparency. So DOGE has been the talk of the nation, right, for the past couple months, especially in South Carolina, right? There's sort of a, let's have a DOGE bill from the Senate. They produced one last session. But South Carolina, and this is for our viewers to really understand as well, has 4 agencies that are already on the books. We have the Office of the State Auditor, we have the Office of the Inspector General, the Legislative Audit Council, and the big long one, House Government Efficiency and Legislative Oversight Committee. So 4 distinct entities that are meant, to hold government accountable. Do you think that we need another agency being DOGE, or do you think that you can leverage these 4 agencies to be more, bullish in terms of how they operate to bring accountability to government?
Well, first and foremost, I'm not a fan of big government at all. So when we talk about DOGE, I like the way President Trump did it. It was a short-term thing. It was made up of business experts that would come in and kind of take a comprehensive look at what was going on and kind of maybe an oversee of the agencies we already have, figuring out, do we need 4? Should we put some of those together? Is there ones that really aren't fitting the bill anymore? I'm a big fan of public-private partnerships. I think what inspired me to get involved and become lieutenant governor when the governor asked me was because I felt like government never brought business to the table. I myself, my friends, my clients, We said that all the time. Like every time a new regulation was put into place, it was like, why didn't anybody come and ask us? If like, what kind of burden was that going to put on us? Like, no matter what the tracking mechanism was. So, I think that what I envision as, and I like to call it SCOGE because I think we should always differentiate ourselves, right? Like little South Carolina's version of Doge. But I think we bring the best and brightest from the business sector into the table and figure out like what are they doing on the private sector side that we could benefit from here on the government side, because government always runs at a lag from what's happening in the private sector. I don't think we need to make a whole new department. I think this should be short term with very impactful suggestions that change the trajectory of what we're doing here in our state.
Thank you, ma'am. So this question you're going to know intimately. So this year, Government Master implemented additional rules around the earmark process, which we were big fans of, to promote transparency in spending. How would your administration improve transparency in the earmark process? Basically, would you try to make that state law, like in statute, that we have member, request forms that are available for everyone to see?
Yeah, I've been, again, being an accountant, transparency is always first and foremost, right? It's the best antiseptic. I think that's my best, that phrase has stuck with me the most. The best antiseptic to anything is light. And so I have always stood behind the governor 100% when the budget comes back. And he was always very clear. Like if you were putting something on a line item or you were trying to dump it into a different cabinet or a department to funnel it through that way, he would veto it. And I think our office has done a great job. Like when we see extra money going into somewhere, somebody from our office making a call and saying, hey, did you request that money? How are you going to use that money? And if we can't get, if we get the, I don't know what it's for, or we did not request it, it was an easy line item veto. And I think what you've seen is over the years, the General Assembly has figured out that that is something that we were very cut and dry on. Like that was a line we drew in the sand, and we were going to stay on the back side of that line. And you saw this year the fewest vetoes ever in the state's history. And again, that goes back to having a good relationship, everybody understanding the expectations of the other side.
We're going to now move into legal and regulatory reform. So I just started this job in August of 2024, coming from the private sector, coming from private equity, because I wanted to give back to the state. I show up in tort reform is the first issue I roll in on, and I was like, whoa, wait a minute, this is intense. So we're going to start with that. So last session, the legislature passed and proposed a proposal on lawsuit reform related to liquor liability. And there was more to it, right? I mean, Senator Massey had, medical malpractice, causal chain, trucking, all that. Liquor liability made it out, which the demand signal was obviously very high for there to be improvement there. What is your position overall on reforming South Carolina's joint and several liability law? And would you want to see us move towards a more pure and several liability law? So who's at fault for what, gets punished for what, vice, just who has the deepest pockets?
Well, yes, and that's just common sense, right? I think that's the one thing that I have heard over the last 7 years is people just want us to go back to common sense. The fact that prior to this new law this year that the governor signed, you could been 1% at fault and got hit with basically the whole claim. And the fact that we made those strides, when I first became lieutenant governor and was talking about that, because coming from the private sector side, we realized that you need competition in the insurance market. And I remember talking about that and everybody going, this is crazy. You will never see tort reform in your lifetime. You just won't. And so this year when that came about, and I'll tell you, I never saw so many people in the state house, except for when President Trump came here in January of 23. I mean, and there were employers from every single sector, and they made their position heard. And, the governor and I had a press conference basically right between both chambers, telling both sides, you can protect business while protecting the people of South Carolina. So get back in your chambers and let's get to work for the people. And we did get tort reform passed. It was good that, basically liquor liability kind of went to the side, and now it's willful wanton neglect, which is a much higher bar. That definitely helped our restaurant owners. And the Restaurant Association, they did their part. They kind of put their olive branch in too and said, listen, we're going to do a better job educating our staff, making sure we scan IDs at night. So I believe that is probably the best thing that happens here in South Carolina is when you get all parties involved to the table and say, hey, let's all work on this together to make it good for everyone. I was very hopeful that when the bill was signed, that the Speaker of the House, the President of the Senate, and the Governor and I all stood there, and everybody giving their pledge that this would not be the end, that this upcoming session in 26, they would continue to move the ball forward with tort reform and making sure that this becomes more fair. That's what businesses want. That's what will bring those secondary carriers into the market. There were a lot of people talking, and now I might be getting in the weeds because that was my business background. Insurance was a big part of that. And it's not like getting the major carriers. The major carriers will stay, and they love when they become only one of two players because then they can pretty much set the rates. What you really want to do is create a business environment where you get those secondary, those really strong second market carriers, that will come in and start cherry picking really good insureds. And when they start doing that, well, what happens to the bigger guys? They have to start either lowering their rates, becoming more attractive, getting more involved. That's the environment that I see that we need to create in South Carolina. That's the environment as governor I would want to cultivate.
We worked a lot with different restaurant groups, sort of advocating for tort reform. And to your point, that the sort of message that was sent from them was, hey, justice, we're not saying get rid of justice, right? If my family were hurt in a car wreck, I would want justice for them against the offender. But there was just a bit of an imbalance they felt. But going out to E&S high-risk lines to get liquor liability insurance, some of them paying $70,000 a year, where over in Georgia, they're paying $5,000, effectively a rounding error on the balance sheet, right? On the P&L. That's what they were voicing to us, and we felt like it was a cause justifiable to pursue. So glad to hear it's back on the docket for this coming session. We'll be there to watch it happen. Sam, we'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, and similarly, an issue that we had some traction on in 2024, judicial reform, and this is back in the spotlight now. In 2024, we made some enhancements to how the JMSC selection process goes, some greater transparency requirements, and a couple additional seats for the governor, which is good. How would you promote judicial reform? And I think for the average viewer, they look at it as like there's kind of three ways. There's the way that we do it, which is just us in Virginia. There's the election of judges, and then there's the federal model, right, where the executive appoints or nominates, and then the Senate confirms. So which of those is kind of your preference, and how would you like to see the issue addressed?
Well, I want to start out by saying what I don't like. I would never like to see our judges elected. Because if you have an election process, it means you have to have a campaign process. And to do that, you have to go out and you have to raise money. And that never gives people a good feeling, right? So I don't like that at all. What I do like is the way the federal model, basically. I think the governor should appoint and the General Assembly can confirm. And there needs to be a list of guidelines. If you want to be a judge, just like in any other job, what are the criteria that you need to have to be that? And that's how we put that process forward. And that is a really good method of doing it. You can tell just from general comments I get all over the state is the way we're doing it now. A lot of people feel really doesn't give judges the ability to be accountable to one thing, which is the law. And we want that for everyone. We want everyone that goes into a courtroom to feel like they have a fair shake. Justice should be blind. And making sure we select our judges differently gives people, at least in my opinion, it gives people a much better comfort level that we're doing that.
Thank you. Moving from the legal side to the more regulatory side, we've seen across the country with the rise of AI, these data centers getting established and moving all across the place. And South Carolina's got a couple that we've recruited that are coming into our state. They obviously require a lot of energy. How would we protect South Carolinians so that way they're not having to cover the rate increase, so they don't have an increase in their energy bills from these data centers coming in and sucking up a lot of this energy? How would we protect South Carolinians from that?
Well, I think the best way to protect South Carolinians is to make sure we have an abundance of energy overall. Take data centers out of the mix. Just 2 years ago, we almost had to have a rolling blackout on Christmas Day. And that's why the governor putting together Power SC, we had again, bringing everybody to the table, getting energy carriers, getting experts in the field, coming right here to the Alumni Center and sitting and having a very in-depth discussion about what we can do to move that forward. The governor said it then, and I agree, we should put everything on the table. And I believe we should look at everything that works for South Carolina. Nuclear is a big thing. President Trump talking about nuclear all the time. There is a lot of excitement about the resurrection of VC Summer and lots of great people coming in, lots of very enthusiastic bidders on that. One of them being the people who constructed Vogel in Georgia. And as a business person and as somebody who's ever done something twice, how exciting is it to get somebody who would build basically the sister site to Vogel? Because anytime you do something a second time, it's more efficient, it comes in under budget. And so I think that would be a really good player in our market. But actually boosting up nuclear gets our base load up, and that's what we need. If we can get our base load up, then the sky's the limit for us. We can get all those reactors going. The big, I called it the big, beautiful energy bill when Secretary Zeldin came, because it had me up and passed. But, I've been out to Santee, Dominion, and Duke, to all of their control centers. And what every single one of them will tell you is that we can create a lot of energy, but it's transferring that energy that we need help on. And now that is a federal issue. And Secretary Zeldin, when he was at Nucor, told me, he said, listen, the president has given me 10 weeks to get rid of useless regulations so that we can start transmitting, more freely. And that sounds about right for the president, right? The president doesn't sleep until he gets everything done. And I don't think he expects any of us to do that either. So, if we can do our part, and the federal government is starting to loosen, in talking to our energy providers, they're saying they're starting to feel some of the loosening of that regulation, which is really good. When it comes to the coal plant that will now be converted to natural gas, that's going to help the PD all the way into Horry County. Right now, they don't, because of the shortage of that, they can't build vertical. And so that becomes a game changer for them. So we need to look at a lot of different aspects of this. Let's just face it, the jobs of the future are going to require a lot of energy. And so we have to be prepared for that. Because what I don't want to see as your governor is the best and brightest in South Carolina coming out of college, and we're losing them to other states. So we have to make sure that the opportunities that will present themselves, we can take advantage of right here in South Carolina.
Thank you. Cool.
So, ma'am, we're going to talk a little bit about education. And Sam is our education wonk. So he's very passionate about it. And Sam, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest issues facing like our children right now going through the school system is kids aren't meeting the necessary standards. So when you look at SAT, ACT, NAEP, Palmetto state assessments, when you look at all of them, they're kind of trending in the wrong direction. And, a lot of people want to identify this as a money problem, but I think there's another issue at hand, and the issue is the use of grading floors, right? So what happens is you have a student who maybe they don't turn in a homework assignment. If you don't turn something in, that's a 0. But the district tells the teacher, put 50. So they put 50, this inflates the grade, and then they just send them on their way. So you have kids not meeting the standard about being advanced, which doesn't do them a service. Would you be in favor of eliminating this practice and ensuring that, meritocracy is restored and you get the grade that you earn?
Oh, I absolutely do. I think I was telling you when I came in, I was having that exact conversation with my son, right? When you talk about homework and all these things and how much it helps, he's a freshman in college, doing really well, all in on getting his stuff done. These are all the things that as a parent you tell your kids. But you're right. We have got to get back to common sense. The more we drop the bar, the more our, overall education outcomes continue to go down. I really believe in universal school choice. I have stood on the soapbox of that since I became lieutenant governor. As I told you earlier, I sit with lieutenant governors from all around the country. And when you look at states that had the biggest increases in educational outcomes, it came through universal school choice. Jeanette Nunez told me a story when her and Governor DeSantis were elected in their first election. She said, "Do you know what won that election for us?" She said it was single moms and moms that had like parents on the other side of the aisle that crossed over because they were not going to allow the state to take away their voucher system. Because parents, no matter where you are and what district, know that education is the way out for their children. We can't drop the ball on that. No, I agree. We have to really get kids motivated to do well. I believe that every high schooler should either come out of high school work ready, college ready, or military ready. And I believe we do a great job getting them college ready and military ready. I think where everybody is suffering is that work ready. There are a lot of great programs that are out there that I've been looking into that actually put certification programs right into high schools. What is the number one problem we're facing today in our schools? Truancy. If you're a high schooler and your path isn't college or your path isn't military, you could possibly look at school as a going nowhere for you, which doesn't get you excited about going. If we could embed those certification programs into their high school day to day, and they could come out of high school really being work ready to do something, I'm hoping as a mom, I've seen it in my kids, it motivates them to get there. But I agree with you 100%. I think we cannot keep dropping the bar for our kids. I think when you raise the bar, they will meet the challenge.
And interesting, Sam and I were talking about this earlier. So the Mississippi Policy Institute's kind of our sister organization in Jackson. There was a piece that was put out. Mississippi has gone from 48th to 18th in the nation in overall education. And what they did was really kind of stunning. They held third graders back. That was like the number age-wise, where they said if they cannot read and write by third grade, we're just going to hold them back, which is the opposite of what a grading board would do, right? And then focus heavily on phonics. And now they've gone from 48 to 18 in 10 years. Little old Mississippi. Kind of crazy. It can be done. It can be done.
You know, I was shocked to learn that Read to Succeed, Read to Succeed came into place. And I remember my children went to our parish school, and I was the book fair mom, right? I thought I was going to die being the book fair mom, because once you're the book fair mom, you always have to be the book fair mom. So word of warning to everybody listening, but I did love it because I believe truly if you can read, you can learn. And if you can learn, you can be anything you want to be. And so I started to look into Read to Succeed long before I was lieutenant governor and realized it had no teeth. It's kind of like what you're talking. It was kind of like this whole conversation on education has been, is that you can, as a principal, and I remember talking about this with the headmaster at my children's school. He said, well, with Read to Succeed, the way it stands, and this was years ago, if I identify a student who can't read at third grade and I go to the parent and say, listen, we need to hold your son or daughter back, they could say absolutely not, and there would be nothing I can do. And I think that's the problem. And you have to have something that has teeth. Sometimes parents, don't want to admit that maybe their child has some issue when it comes to anything. And that's where schools need to kind of be the expert in the situation. And, Nick Zais came to me when I was just elected, and he walked in my office. He was working for Betsy DeVos then in DC, and he had a white binder. And it's usually very scary when somebody comes to your office with a big binder, because I never know what I'm getting myself into. But he summarized it into one thing. He said, do not let people fool you that poor kids can't learn. Right. It is the teacher in the classroom. And so he says, it's not money, because some of our districts that have the most expense per child in education has not so great scores. So he says, we have to have a really big concentration of how do we get the best teachers in the classroom, because it's those enthusiastic teachers that will keep kids. And he said it then, and I've heard people say this as I've heard talks on education for years. Everybody remembers that one teacher that really got them excited about learning or really had them turn the corner with reading. So I think that's what needs to be our focus. I think set the bar high. Let's get school choice into play so parents have It's not just their right, it's their responsibility to educate their children in a way that's best. I have 3 children. They all learned very different growing up in the same house. And parents are the best, they're the best people to know what will work for their children.
Well, ma'am, we have one more question for you.
Okay.
So, what do you think, if you were elected governor, the biggest issue in the state would be that you would walk in and face day one?
It's funny. I get that question a lot, and most business people who are listening to this will understand my answer. There is never just one issue when you're the CEO.
Right.
You have 10 balls in the air all at the same time. We have to make sure we're moving the state forward with the careers and the jobs of the future. And so if you're going to attract those businesses in, well, that's one. You're going to need the energy to do that. You're going to have to solve that problem. You need to make sure that you're working with the Secretary of Education to make sure that, or the Superintendent of Education to make sure that we have embedded in our curriculum what it takes to get them to what those jobs of the future are going to be. So, and on top of that, everybody wants to see government run efficiently. And to me, that's top of mind. How do we go into all of our cabinets? How do we go into all of our departments and say, listen, I want to see what you're running on. Is it the best? Where do we need to get? How do we make you run more efficient? Because if we can't get people on systems that are running efficiently, we can't give them the latest technology. And I think when everybody walks into a DMV, they would love to see the latest technology. We have to make sure that they are able to give them what they want, and that really starts with us solving those problems. So there isn't just one thing. I think they all connect together, and that's why you need the CEO of the state to understand.
Thank you, ma'am. Is there anything you would like to add before we close?
Yeah, it kind of goes back into what we were saying. I love what I do every single day because I feel like I'm making an impact and I'm making a difference. What I would say is if we look at 2026 and the elections ahead, look at who has the resume to do the job. Look and see who has been there, who's created jobs, who has signed the front of paychecks, who understands when the insurance market gets light, what that does to especially small businesses. Big businesses can weigh things out a lot more. They can become self-insured, but it's those small and medium-sized businesses that are really affected, like we talked about. Who can bring all that to the table and give that level of expertise to the state? So that's the one thing that I've been talking about a lot. When you look at who's going to lead the state, elections have consequences. And so make sure you're picking the most qualified candidate.
Lieutenant Governor Pamela Evette, thank you so much for being with us. And thank you all for watching at home. And we'll see you next time.